Hi, people.
Whenever,
it's going to cut into.
just go for it. Yeah. Do you need anything else? Please. There's some water there. Yeah, of course. We didn't want to put on the sheet because it's smells. Yeah, I know. Sleeping there, is that right? Hey, great. How are you?
Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to do a health and safety announcement. I'm not going to say anything else important, but make sure your seatbelts are fastened. Extinguish your cigarettes. Please turn off your cell phones. It's really important you do that. And if you have Wi-Fi connected, if your cell phone is switched off completely, that's fine. But if you're leaving it on mute, your phone on, please turn off your Wi-Fi so it doesn't eat into our Wi-Fi. We need a good connection tonight for obvious reasons. Health and safety, if you do need to use the toilet, of course you're welcome to do so at any time. Don't really have to hang on. The toilets are directly heading there to the left of the elevator, straight ahead. If there's an ear-splitting siren, it is an alarm, it's not a test. You wouldn't dare. It really is a genuine alarm. I will be your floor warden and I will look after you, but you're basically going to make your way down the stairs. You won't want to use the lifts. So use the public stairs, make your way down to the ground floor, and the security guards will let you out to congregate on the plaza away from the building. You can also get down via the staff stairs and make your way to the upper basin and congregate outside there. But, I'm sure that won't happen, but it'll be fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
I shall describe new bottoms. Sit. Sit your bed. That's it. Three minutes.
Okay. Cool. There might be a few civilian people that's going to be covered. Like maybe space. Well, three. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Can you hear us, Behrouz? Can you hear us?
I don't think that one's around now.
Hello, Behrouz?
Hello.
Yeah. Thanks,
Can you hear
Behrouz.
me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, we're about to start. Can you hear me?
Yeah. When are you going to start the
We're going to start now.
session?
We're going to start right now.
سلام بهروز.
Right now?
آره میخوایم الان شروع میکنیم.
چون من داشتم سیگار میکشم.
آره نه راحت باش. الان دیگه الان صدا پخش
چه راحت بود؟
راحت باش سیگارتو بکش. ما مزاحمت نشیم. I told him, don't let us bother you. Have your cigarette.
Yeah. I'm going to talk for a while, Behrouz. You can smoke.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so hello and welcome to A Voice from Manus Island, an evening with Behrouz Boochani and Omid Tofighian. My name is Neil Valley. I'm a researcher at the University of Otago in the English and Linguistics program and the Center for Global Migrations. And this is a really special event for our city, for Dunedin, and the overwhelming interest in the event has been really heartening. And I'm sure Omid and Behrouz will be really pleased to see the turnout tonight. We also have a group watching in Invercargill. Some people have gathered down there to watch a live stream on YouTube. So I say hello to them, to Liam Hartnett down there, who's organised that. And before I introduce our very special guest, I just want to give you a kind of brief overview of how the evening will go. So we'll begin with a discussion with Behrouz and Omid about this remarkable book, No Friend But the Mountains. And then we'll have our first of our two poetic interludes. So in our first reading, Emma Neal and Rian Gallagher will read to us. Then we will continue our discussion with Behrouz and Omid, hopefully turn our attention more towards a kind of wider context, the kind of wider geopolitical context of the book and the Australian border regime. And then we'll have our second poetry interlude, which will be with Lindy Edmeades and Fiona Farrell. And then we'll finish the evening by inviting questions from the audience for Behrouz and Omid. As many of you have seen, that the University Bookshop have set up a stall selling the book, and the book of some of the books of our poets as well. And there will also be catering provided afterwards from Abdel Mombin Kayasa, who's a local caterer. And before I go in to fully introduce Behrouz and Omid, I've got some thank yous to pass out for people who helped me organise this event, particularly to Nikki Page from UNESCO City of Literature. I brought the idea to her first of all, and she, if she hadn't been interested, the event would not have got off the ground, and she's been integral throughout the whole process. I'm sincerely grateful for her help. To Dr. Hunter Hatfield and the rest of the English and Linguistics programme at the University of Otago. Hunter helped gain a University of Otago continuing education grant that paid for Omids to get down here, which is fantastic. And the rest of the programme gave their enthusiastic support for the event. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful for that. To Paul Naidu, who's head of the English Language Partners in Dunedin. English Language Partners are a really important group in our community. They provide English lessons to recent migrants and refugees. And they've wholeheartedly supported this event from the start and contributed funding towards it. And again, I'm deeply, deeply grateful to Paul for his help. And to Kay, finally to Kay Mercer at the library. I think all of us know that anyone who's had an event here at the library knows that it wouldn't happen if Kay wasn't involved. And she had to answer all of my inane questions. She did that with patience and expertise, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for that. I'd like to thank Bart for providing sound tonight and Callum for recording the event. The event will be, it's going to be recorded by Callum and it will be put up online in the coming weeks afterwards. Okay, so without further ado, let me move towards my discussion, our discussion with Omid and Behrouz. So for those of you who are not fully aware of the barbarity of the Australian offshore detention system, let me provide some very brief context. Omid, Behrouz, and I will talk about this anyway, but just to get us into the discussion. So the Australian government have been detaining migrants and refugees in offshore detention centres since the turn of the century, although there's also a longer history of that, which we might get into. But these detentions escalated again in 2012 with the reopening of the Manus Island and Nauru regional processing centres, when the then Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd stated the immortal line, quote, "From now on, any asylum seeker who arrives in Australia by boat will have no chance of being settled in Australia as refugees." Since then, there have been tales of unspeakable horror on these islands, tales of self-harm, suicide, physical and psychological torture, people setting themselves on fire, and acts of murder, with many of these tales involving children. Behrouz Boochani has witnessed and chronicled many of these events in his stunning multi-award-winning book, No Friend But the Mountains, written laboriously on his phone in Farsi from within Manus Prison and translated into English by Omid Tofighian. But the book does much more than chronicle these events. It combines journalistic prowess with philosophical critique, incorporating Kurdish mythology and poetry with political commentary and psychoanalytic reflection. It situates the detention centres on Manus Island and Nauru within histories of colonisation and migration, and links these detention centres to other forms of social, political, economic, and environmental injustice. No Friend But the Mountains will go down in history as one of the great pieces of prison literature. And there is no doubt that with this book, Behrouz Boochani has established himself as one of the most astute political and cultural thinkers of our age. It's my great honour to introduce him. Associate Professor Behrouz Boochani graduated from Tarbiyat Muallim University and Tarbiyat Madaris University both in Tehran. He holds a master's degree in political science, political geography, and geopolitics. He is a Kurdish-Iranian writer, journalist, scholar, cultural advocate, and filmmaker. From 2013 to 2017, he was a political prisoner incarcerated by the Australian government in the Manus Island Regional Processing Centre in Papua New Guinea. Since being forcibly transferred in 2017, he continued to be incarcerated in one of the new prisons on the island. Boochani is Adjunct Associate Professor in Social Sciences at the University of New South Wales, non-resident visiting scholar at the Sydney Asia Pacific Migration Centre, University of Sydney, honorary member of PEN International, and winner of numerous journalism awards. He publishes regularly with The Guardian, and his writing also features in the Saturday paper, Huffington Post, Financial Times, and the Sydney Morning Herald. Boochani is also co-director with Arash Kamali Sarvastani of the 2017 feature-length film Chaka Please Tell Us the Time, and collaborator on the play Manus. He is author of No Friend But the Mountains, Running from Manus Prison. At the Victorian Premier Literary Awards 2019, his book won the Victorian Prize for Literature in addition to the non-fiction category. He also won the Special Award at the New South Wales Premier Literary Awards and Non-Fiction Book of the Year at the Australian Industry Book Awards. Behrouz joins us via Skype from Manus Island. Joining us in person is Dr. Omid Tofighian, who is an award-winning lecturer, researcher, and community advocate, combining philosophy with interest in citizen media, popular culture, displacement, and discrimination. He completed his PhD in philosophy at Leiden University in Netherlands and graduated with a combined honours degree in philosophy and studies in religion at the University of Sydney. Tofighian has taught in various universities in Australia, Abu Dhabi, Belgium, and the Netherlands. His current roles include Assistant Professor of English and Comparative Literature at the American University in Cairo, Adjunct Lecturer in the School of Arts and Media at the University of New South Wales, Honorary Research Associate for the Department of Philosophy, University of Sydney, Faculty at Iran Academia, and Campaign Manager for Why Is My Curriculum White, Australasia. He's published numerous books and journal articles, is author of Myth and Philosophy and Platonic Dialogues, which was published in 2016, and translator of Behrouz Boochani's multi-award-winning book, No Friend But the Mountains. Please join me in welcoming Behrouz and Omid through Dunedin.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to everyone who's been involved in organising this.
Yeah, thank you for joining us here. It's really a special event for our city. I'm sure I speak for everyone here to say that we're really honoured to have you both here. And I just wanted to start really briefly with the kind of, if we could have just a kind of overview of how the book came about. Perhaps either you or Behrouz would want to answer that to start with. Perhaps you give us a context and then Behrouz can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Behrouz, I'll explain a little bit about how we met and how the book project began, and I'll let you describe some of the more profound details of the book, the way you know best. I've been involved in working with displaced and exiled peoples for some time. It's also part of my own history as well, so it's something I'm passionate about, not just from an academic and activist perspective, but also in terms of my identity as well. So it was about the beginning of February 2016 that I noticed an article published in The Guardian, and when I read it, it was shared amongst some of the activist groups that I was connected with. When I read it, I thought to myself, this is an amazing work of analysis. In fact, I interpreted it as being a philosophical interpretation, a philosophical critique. And it was especially important because it was written from within the detention center, from someone within the detention center. And I was amazed why I don't know this person, why I haven't heard of this journalist who's been locked up, and why isn't he part of the discourse? So I said, I have to send this writer, this intellectual, a message. So I contacted him through Facebook, and luckily, Behrouz responded. He gets quite a lot of messages. And at that time, he wasn't as well known as he is now, of course, but still with the weak internet connection and the lack of access to the internet, I wasn't expecting a reply immediately or at all. So when he replied, we started a slow conversation. And when he found out that I'm an academic, he asked if I could help with translation every now and then. His first translator, Manus Mansubi, of course, has a lot of commitments, has a life as well, and does a lot of important things. And Behrouz is a really prolific writer, so he he needed to be in contact with other people. He needed to create a network of people who could help him out when it was necessary. So I said, look, I'm not a translator, but I can definitely help if you have trouble finding someone to translate urgently. So I translated an article soon after that, and the response was excellent. We continued. Later that year, I accepted to translate the book, and the rest is history.
Great. I also, well, if I can ask you, Behrouz, quickly. You've said in the past that so you have a history. You were a journalist in Iran before you had to leave, and you said in the past that the language of journalism has never been strong enough or critical enough to describe the suffering on Manus Island and Nauru. Can you explain why? Can you perhaps tell us why you wrote this kind of book rather than simply a journalistic text?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I think you pointed out the exceptional and important thing that always I work on this way, to criticize journalism language and creating new language. Now, at the beginning when you were talking about the history of Australian detention industry, you mentioned that this place, of processing center, So I think, what I call this place prison. So prison is one of the first concepts that I created because I didn't want to use the words and concept that created by the government. The government always, try to create its language and justify this barbaric policy through that language. So unfortunately, the media and the current journalism language exactly is the language that the government is using. Because the journalism is related to the power, it's related to the structures, it's related to the power structure. So that's why I needed a different kind of language to represent our situation, and be able to tell this story, and I be able to tell this story without reducing this tragedy. When we are using government language, unfortunately, we help the government to reduce this tragedy. What is happening in Australia now? The Australian media, they always, many of them ignore us completely, and some of them that sometimes they, put news about us, they, manage the information. Let me give you an example. Someone made contact with me and said that after 6 years that I have been following the news, I have looking for the media. Just now, I feel and I think I understand the system. Just now that I finished your book. So that means, I think, you cannot understand this system by following the news, because they always reduce this, they all work in a superficial way. So that's why, it was important that I rely on a different language, like created a different language, and I rely on arts and artistic language. That's one of this language, literature. So literature, I say that in my acceptance speech when I receive that award. That I believe that the literature and literary language has this power challenge the system. So that's why even on my opinion article for the media, my language is different with other countries. I never call this place offshore processing center. I never call this place, this policy, offshore policy or something like this. I use my language. I use exile. I use thematic culture. I use prison. I use curriculum system. I use, different kind of words I use. Even I don't say I arrived in Manus, but I didn't arrive in Manus. They exiled in Manus. So that's why I should be careful with the language that you are using. So of course the journalism language is not capable that we tell this story. And if we tell this story in this current journalism language, in fact, we were reducing this traffic to some news, and also we are helping to commodification of pain and objectification of pain and suffering in Manus Island and Cairo. Unfortunately, after 6 years, when I look at this policy, this exile policy, I can see that it became like markets for many, and for market for many people who are working on that, and those who are against us.
That's fantastic, Behrouz. Thank you so much. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, actually, from the very first article that I read written by Behrouz, I noticed that there was a distinct literary quality to it. So there was this philosophical dimension. There was this really deep, well-skilled journalist coming through, the voice of a well-skilled journalist coming through. But there was also this literary quality to it as well. So I actually noticed what was happening here was beyond the one genre. There were multiple genres and multiple layers. And Behrouz increased this kind of multi-layered approach as he continued to write journalism. And so when I started reading the book, I noticed that not only was he using his journalistic skills, he was bringing in a whole range of other things, philosophy, psychoanalytic examination. On top of that, he was mixing folklore and epic and mythology, particularly from Kurdish culture and Kurdish resistance, but also from Persian literature, classical literature, and on top of that, Manusian culture and thought. So there was a whole range of different things going on, and one of the things that I think is important, and one of the things that I really tried to stress, is that he had to write literature because he wants to evoke the feeling of systematic torture. One of the things that he was trying to do from the very beginning with his journalism was explain to people that what's happening here, what's happening in Manus Island and in Nauru, and I should mention onshore detention and community detention in Australia, what people are going through is a form of systematic torture. And stats and data and kind of like journalistic style description really couldn't communicate that, couldn't evoke that feeling of systematic torture. And I think he achieved that by mixing all of these different styles and evoking the feeling, the lived experience and the lived endurance in his literature.
I think that's what's so remarkable about the text. Is that you've described it in the past as an anti-genre, and it's unlike any book I've read before. It's quite a remarkable piece of, and a kind of artistic sense, it's an absolutely remarkable piece of writing, and that's stunning, given it was written on a phone within right at the heart of the prison system. And that's one question, actually, thinking about language, the importance of language. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit, Omid, about the translation process, given that Behrouz has talked so powerfully about the importance of language in trying to describe the systematic torture. How did you find that daunting when you first read the book, when you first were approached to translate it? And then how did you preserve the kind of the energy of the language that Behrouz wrote in Farsi, and when you translated to English, and did anything change in that process?
Well, from the very beginning, I was really anxious because, as I said, I'm not trained as a translator. And, although I should say that I've been interpreting and translating for my parents pretty much my whole life, so I didn't realize that this was going to be a skill that would help me later on in my research. And,
kept getting frustrated.
I'm sorry?
You kept getting frustrated with them when they were.
Well, yes, and also, you know, there was a lot of responsibility. It actually became, after a while, it became second nature.
Okay.
And I didn't really think about it as, you know, developing a skill or enhancing any kind of talent or any kind of training in terms of understanding language and the differences between language and the transfer of meaning. And I think when I first started translating Behrouz's journalism, I noticed that there's something quite well honed in me that's coming through, and it developed. It became better after I continued with Behrouz. Because before then, I really only translated very short passages, or and most of my translating work was actually interpreting verbal. So when Behrouz asked me to switch from journalism to literature, I was actually really anxious because I know literature is one thing and journalism is very different. But as I started reading the book, I noticed that I think 3 or 4 pages into it, I was certain this was going to be a masterpiece. It was so much more profound and sophisticated and multi-layered than anything I'd ever read before in English or in Farsi. And what was interesting was that Behrouz was sending text messages out from, let's say, 1 paragraph up to 2 pages to Manus Mansubi, and she would collect these text messages, and based on Behrouz's instruction, she put them into chapters. Then once I came into the project, she emailed me those PDFs of every chapter. So when I received each chapter, basically I was looking at 1 long text message. And I translated that whole chapter, or each chapter, and then as I was translating and consulting with Behrouz would send me short passages, sometimes a paragraph, sometimes a sentence. Every now and then he'd send me a voice text with a sentence, and he'd ask me, you know, do you think this would fit well here, or Omid, please put this at the end, and you know, so on and so forth. So it's really difficult to explain what the process is like. There are so many different layers and phases and experiences, but we can talk more about that later. But I think Behrouz could probably explain better than me.
I think so.
The difficulties he had to face in writing this book and why he had to write it using WhatsApp text messages.
Exactly. I wonder, Behrouz, if you could tell us a little bit more about how you wrote the book and why you had to use WhatsApp, and how did you do it without being discovered?
Yeah, actually, you know, it was not the first time I was, you know, working on a big project. So before that, I made a movie on my phone, on WhatsApp, with my co-director, Arash Kamali Sadistani, based in Netherlands. So we made that movie only on via WhatsApp. So it was really hard, you know. I had to be awake until morning to send the file. So it was really hard to make a movie in 90 minutes, actually 89 minutes via WhatsApp, and that move we really to the festival, such as Sydney Film Festival and some festival in Gothenburg, in Scotland, and reached to the competition category in London Film Festival. So it was a big achievement for me and for everyone. So I think writing a book on WhatsApp is much easier. That's why, it was Omid was the first experience, but for me was the second. And now, you know, when the book published, and many mainstream media just focus on this, that how this person, this writer wrote a book on WhatsApp, and they just focused on WhatsApp, and how I did write this. So on that time, I was started to think. So it was for other people, it is a very abnormal act. So for other people, it's very, it's hard for them to accept that. It's hard for them to imagine that. But for me, is my phone became like my office. So still, right now, as I join you just via my phone. So I attend the conferences and festivals by only a phone. And I think, for people who, are watching me from out of this island, they, they think that it's impossible, but actually it's possible. And I have published, I have written all of my articles, more than, I think, hundreds articles and interviews only via my phone. And that's why, I think, if you give me a computer now, it's hard for me to no. This phone. So I think, so it's not a strange thing for me.
I should mention that Behrouz, he's an associate professor at UNSW, recently appointed. He also writes academic articles. I'm very privileged to have co-authored a couple of them with him. He has an article coming out in October on the making of Cholka, Please Tell Us the Time, the film. There's a special section in a volume of a journal called Alphaville. That will be dedicated to Cholka, Please Tell Us the Time. Behrouz wrote an article, a reflective article about the making of that and his interpretation of it. And the article was also written on WhatsApp and sent to me to translate. So there's multiple layers of translation and authorship and reflection going on here.
And I should point out actually to everyone that there's going to be a screening of Cholka, Please Tell Us the Time tomorrow evening. In Burns 2 Lecture Theatre at the University of Otago at 5 o'clock. There's some posters up on the wall outside. So it's open to the public, so anyone is welcome to come. And we'll maybe talk a little bit about it afterwards as well, which would be great. I think we'll go into our first poetry section soon, but I wanted to ask you, Behrouz, you talk in the book about the importance of poetry to Kurdish culture and to yourself. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how important do you think that poetry is to not only to your situation but to society and more generally.
Pardon, Omid, چی بود؟
به نظر شما فرهنگ و سنت و ادبیات کردی خیلی برای شما مهمه و خیلی نقش مهمی داره تو کتاب. شعر چه نقشی داره تو زندگیت با تو نوشته هات؟
Yeah, actually, about Kurdistan, even the movie, Cholka, Please Tell Us the Time, that it is about the refugees in Manus Island, but in fact, it's about the local people as well, against colonialists. And colonialism is a culture that I was born in, and I grew up in colonialism. So when they exiled me to Manus Island, as a court, exactly, I left Iran because I was a court. I left Iran because of my cultural activism, because of my journalism works towards the Kurdish. The culture, about Kurdish culture. So when they exiled me to Manus Island, it was very familiar for me to understand that, this policy, the whole this policy established on colonialist thinking. So it was not a strange and unknown thing for me. So even in the movie Cholka, Please Tell Us the Time, a part of it the people who talk in the movie, they speak in Kurdish. The Kurdish cultural elements in the movie, the Kurdish music, the Kurdish songs, and also even I show the Kurdistan flag. So I think it's I as a Kurd, first as a human, and second as a Kurd, I am committed, to work about Kurdistan and the tragedy in the history of British people are the biggest nation in the world. The Kurdish people still are struggling to get this right. They're struggling that the central government recognize their language as a formal language. So that's why, I, as a human, second as a core, I am committed to anything that I do, even about the refugee, even about, from a big layer of my work should be about Kurdistan, because I have committed to tell stories. So that's why even in the movie Chalk of the last time and in the book, actually I am introducing the Kurdish culture, and I am telling the something about the Kurdistan, and even the title of the book, Northern Golden Mountains, actually it is a Kurdish term that I use it to and name this book, so to introduce the Kurdistan and engage more people with the history of Kurdistan and political plight in the history of Kurdish people. So that's why I think in all of my works, a big layer to Kurdistan and about the politics in Kurdistan and about the Kurdish culture and folklore and music. So that's why I think, and about the poetry, poetry, in Iran, Iranian culture, in Kurdish culture, poetry is like, is the main element of the culture. So everyone in Iran and Kurdistan in some ways are poet, So, and interesting thing is that I don't recognize myself as a poet, strongly, because because we grew up in poetry, and we understand, it is a part of our culture. So there are biggest poets in Iran and in Kurdistan. So that's why I think about probably as a poet, even going into many times that you are poet, I say, no, I'm not a poet, So that's why, but I am using poetry. I am using poetry to create new, perspective in my works. So I don't work like as a professional poet, but I am using poetry. I am using poetry. Just, Omid میخوام اینو بگم poetry مثل یه نمکدانه برای من. خب نمکدان نمیخواد چیز بریم امید دارم میخوام بگم مثل یه نمکدانه این من نمک اینجور میپاشم رو غذا این پاوتری برای من یعنی من نمیخوام از پاوتری فقط اینو استفاده میکنم یه نمک میپاشم به غذا که غذا خوشمزه بشه خوش‌طعم بشه یا فلفل نمیدونم.
Poetry for me is like a salt shaker. I use it to add flavor to the meal that I've prepared. You could call it salt and pepper or spices. It's something that I add to what to the meal that I've already prepared. And actually, maybe later when there's time, I can actually talk about how the poetic form in the book actually took shape, because that's something, the way Behrouz's poetic style and his poetic vision was transferred into the English text. It's actually an interesting story.
Maybe we'll talk about that after we've heard our first two poets. That's a really good idea. So I'm going to introduce our first two poets. As many of us know here, Dunedin is a rich literary history, which has cemented its status as a UNESCO City of Literature. And it's great to hear Behrouz's kind of how important poetry is to kind of Kurdish and Iranian culture. And I think many of us in here would agree that the health of any good society can be tested by the health of its poets. Unfortunately tonight, we have four of Dunedin's finest poets reading for us. So in this first section of poetry, we're going to have Emma Neal and Rian Gallagher. And Emma Neal has had a number of novels and poetry collections published. She is the current editor of Landfall, New Zealand's longest running journal of arts and letters. Her most recent poetry collection, To the Occupant, was published by University of Otago Press in May 2019. And Rian Gallagher, who will come up after Emma, her first poetry collection, Saltwater Creek, was shortlisted for the Forward Prize, her first collection. Her second poetry collection, Shift, won the 2012 New Zealand Post Book Award for Poetry. Rian was the Robert Burns Fellow in 2018. Give us a hand for Emma.
It's a privilege to meet such an extraordinary writer and intellectual, Behrouz. Your endurance and advocacy make me want a new language, a new word for heroic that hasn't been diluted or tarnished by its use in other popular contexts. Yet speaking here is a privilege nobody could want, as it means we stand and witness to prolonged governmental human rights abuses. My paternal grandfather was a prisoner of war for 6 years during World War II, and I grew up hearing snatches of story about his experience that always made me say things like, I just can't imagine how terrifying it must have been. And he would say, good, may you never truly know. It feels very strange to be standing here, an embodiment of the privilege of that not knowing. But it shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a right. We should all have the right never to know religious, ethnic, or cultural persecution or detention without trial. As the UN Refugee Agency says, asylum is a fundamental human right for people fleeing violence, persecution, war, or disaster at home. I can only hope that events like tonight's occasion help to shine the full searchlight of shame onto the Australian government's deliberate and inhumane policy of oppression. The poem I'll read tonight is a response to an image that many of you will have seen on world media of the little Syrian boy, Alan Kurdi, or Shenu. Alan was of Kurdish ethnic background, and his family tried to reach Europe during 2015 in order to escape ISIL. They wanted to get to Canada, but they weren't granted asylum there, so they made an attempt to reach the island of Kos. After paying $5,860 for their place in a small inflatable boat that could take up to 8 passengers, it was overloaded with 16 people and capsized in the Mediterranean. So the poem is both a response to the photo that many of you will have seen, but also to the way that a particular Guardian article was framed. It's called Warning. This item contains images an audience may find distressing. A thin child in clothes that don't quite fit, mid-shin trousers and red short sleeves, although the autumn morning is charity cold. His back swaddled in foreign air, face down against the white winding cloth of the shallows, cheeks pressed to wet sand like a baby burrowed into the scent trace of lavender. Only please, won't someone tuck love's covers over his shoulders? Don't stay in that twist, little one. Your back and neck will ache when you wake. The sea is an unschooled nurse to let you lie that way. The white hygiene gloves of the soldier, such small care who lifts your drifted spine. He is trained not to weep, so he can still see this shore hill, navigate the sinkholes of all dread terrain, trained not to mistake you for his own son, to stifle the cries, Allahu Akbar, grant forgiveness. In his arms, horrors answer. This era contains events we must find appalling.
It's a real privilege to be part of an event with you, Behrouz and Omid. I just found the book was an extraordinary experience to read. I've never had time to read what it means to have citizenship, the privilege of citizenship. The piece I'm going to read is called The Gate, and it's attempting to enact some of the energies around the building of the Seacliff Mental Asylum. It's written in prose and is part parable, part fable. Asylums were set up in the first instances not as hospitals. They were custodial in nature and much more about incarceration. In the 1870s and 80s, the demand for labourers and women in New Zealand was in competition with the ideal of keeping the colony clean. We let people in. The gold rush, the assisted immigration scheme. But this moment when large numbers of people were arriving was also the moment when this mega asylum was being built. It replaced the inner city asylum and put people in a place where we could no longer see them or hear from them. And this, together with the very loose definition of what it meant to be a lunatic, was among other things a mechanism of social control. I just want to quote from the contemporary psychoanalyst Darian Leader. The old racist, quote, the old racist distinction between them and us, atrocities of past and present are so often predicated on exclusion from the category human. The Gate. A long time ago, there was a gate in the heart of the city. It was an ancient gate. The people behind the gate were called many things. One thing they had in common was their experience of the gate. So I'm going to call them the gate people. The gatekeepers held a meeting to debate the state of the gate. One man presented a plan for a new gate. The gatekeepers were very worried. Up to this time, they had sent gate people back to where they came from. But now the floodgates had opened. People were arriving from all over the world. Everything had got mixed up. There were gate people wandering around the streets amid the ordinary citizens. The gatekeepers came to this land intent on turning it into their promised land. Many ordinary citizens shared this dream. Now the hoped-for promised land was beginning to look like the nightmare of their old land. The ancient gate tainted the heart of the city. The walls were not high enough. Citizens did not want to see gate people. Land was losing value. Businesses were losing money. A great deal hung on the new gate. Let us not hesitate, said the gatekeepers. And so the great removal began. The gate people were escorted down through the streets and taken away, for the new gate had been built at a sacred distance from the city. Over time, many people passed through the gate and became gate people, and many of these were never seen or heard from again. Some citizens pretended the gate had nothing to do with them, but no one, not even the pretenders, could forget that the gate existed. On the slope above the sea, the high, wide, heavy gate stood. This is a story about the gate, that the land on which the gate stood had its own story. The spirits of the land lifted. Cracks appeared in the gate. It began to move. This gate must be made to sit still, even if we have to chain it down, said a gatekeeper. But the spirits of the land continued to lift. Rain came, particles shifted, and the gate in the end was fated to a slow, buckling, twisted decline. And so today, we hardly think of the gate at all. Many years have passed since the high, wide, heavy gate stood on the slope above the sea. People go out to the land and walk in the remnants of the old gate garden and are refreshed by the sea air. Sometimes you will see a visitor standing on the site, gazing into the big space the way a migrant might stand on the shore, thinking of their homeland, as if messages were being sent on the waves. The past is never really past. And so it is that the land spirits still stir and lift, burdened yet with the imprint. On days when the mist rolls in over the slope, you too may feel the gate in the air above and hear the grinding ache of the hinges as it opens and the gate people come to the threshold, voiceless and pleading.
Thank you, Emma and Rian. That was stunning. So I wondered maybe if we could just pick up where you were, just where we left off, where you mentioned about how poetry came to be in the book.
Actually, so many new ideas and so many new points of conversation have just come to mind after listening to those two poems. So thank you. I'd like to return to some of the themes that you touched on, you expressed so beautifully in your poetry. When I started to translate Behrouz's book, I noticed that some kind of change or transformation in sentence structure had to take place. Farsi has very long sentences, particularly when writing literature. It's what they call an Indo-European language, so it's very similar to German and some in the Romance languages. So there's the subject at the beginning, the main verb is at the end, and there are a lot of consecutive clauses in between. So trying to translate this and by keeping the sentence structure becomes really awkward, really difficult to read in English, and loses all of the melody, the rhythm, the poetic resonance in the original language. So what I had to do was actually split up the sentences into a number of smaller sentences, which meant that I had to repeat subjects, verbs, adverbs, adjectives, phrases. So because I was splitting up the sentence, the meaning had to come across. One long sentence became a series of short sentences with a lot of repetition. When you read the book, you'll notice that there's quite a bit of repetition and interesting use of synonyms and different framings of certain phrases. Now, after maybe the second review of the chapters, the earlier chapters, I noticed that certain passages, because of this splitting up, because of this repetition, actually sounded like poetry. So at a certain point, we decided, in consultation with Behrouz, we decided to actually create poems out of those broken up, fragmented sentences. So Farsi prose was actually translated into English verse in many parts of the book. And this kind of flow or this fluidity between prose and poetry worked perfectly well and actually captures so much of Behrouz's poetic or rhythmic vision, so much of the folklore, so much of the epic that he wants to convey, or the things he wants to evoke using this particular kind of, poetic understanding or poetic view of the world, worked extremely well with this kind of interchange between prose and verse.
Yeah, and I think that's what's quite remarkable in the sense that the repetition then becomes actually a very prominent part of the book, because the repetition of the language kind of reflects the repetition of daily life in the prison. So it actually in the translation process, we start to see it kind of works in terms of putting forward, as Behrouz has talked about, the kind of lived experience of prison. Yeah, so I think that's fascinating. I wonder, Behrouz, if we could maybe turn slightly towards the kind of bigger picture, the bigger kind of geopolitical picture. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about the systematic torture and your idea that you built in collaboration with Omid of the hierarchical system. I wonder if you can maybe briefly explain to us what you mean by that.
Yes, the main concept that I have used in this book is the hierarchical system. So hierarchical system is a concept that I use to describe the systematic torture and how this prison system is complicated, and how the people who are, running this prison system have control on people and establish this system and put people through a system to take people's identity and reduce them to only some numbers and take people freedom, individuality, humanity, and morality. So in this prison system, the system, I think obviously you can read in the book that the guards and the system, they, keep people in a long queue just to get a piece of cake. Keep people in a long queue just to get a razor. And that is, and also creates hate between the prisoners. They establish this system that the prisoners, hate each other after a while. And now in Manus we can see, there is a brotherhood culture in Manus, because people know how family, they know how they have to rely on each other. But still, you can feel that people are so tired of each other. And, in some ways, they hate each other. So you can see, and I think it is a part of this prison culture. So the curricular system also is a concept that let us and allowed us to understand Manus prison system beyond this island. And we understand structures who are similar with this prison system, in the society in Australia or in Western societies. And I talked with Omid. So there are many structures in society like Australia, and we reached to this place that the universities are very similar with the prison system in Manus. I think that is interesting. So because this system, in the hospitals, in the military places, in education system, they keep people through a complicated bureaucratic system and make people like robots. They take people freedom, and I think it's important. What I want to say in this book is that for understanding the Australian, we can say that there are many prisons in the Australian society, in the Western societies, same as the prison system in Manus Island. So I think for understanding those prison systems that established and designed to take people freedom and individuality, the original version is we can't find it in Manus prison system. can't find it here. So, but I described that in Omid ببخشید اینو اگه میشه توضیح بده که من اومدم اون سیستم بروکراتیک و اون بروکراسی خیلی پیچیده‌ای که توی زندان هست و آدم رو مکانیزه میکنه، آدما رو ماشینیزه میکنه. من این دقیقا از این کار سیستم استفاده کردم که اینو توضیح بدم که چطور آدما رو مکانیزه میکنه، آدما رو ماشینیزه میکنه با زندان هست.
What I tried to do in the book is talk about how this extremely complex bureaucratic system is designed for the purposes of creating or transforming human beings into machines, mechanizing human behavior. So the hierarchical system is a concept. It's a notion or an approach that tries to unpack or tries to explain this particular process of transforming human beings into machines.
I wonder to
تو کتاب من اشاره کردم که در مورد صف‌ها که گفتم اینا رو به عنوان صف‌های هوشمند یا صف‌های متفکر و من اینجور استفاده کردم. یعنی کلمه‌ای که استفاده کردم اینه، یعنی یک فکر و یک تفکری و یک اندیشه‌ای پشت این صف‌ها هست. همینجور صف‌های معمولی نیست که آدم با توی صف وایسادن که یک پرتقال بگیرن. اینا صف‌های هوشمنده، صف‌های متفکره، طراحی شده.
When in the book, I have a section where I describe the queue, the way the queue has been designed, and I talk about the queue as though it has agency, it's conscious. The queue has intelligence. So when I talk about the queue, I'm not talking about just people waiting in line to get an orange, for example. I'm talking about something that has been designed and something that has its own agency, that works on its own, operates on its own.
So, and I think that's what's so remarkable about this book, in the sense that it's so important to remember that this is not a memoir. This is a philosophical text, a theoretical text. And I think the really important thing to realize is that Manus Prison is not an aberration. It's a manifestation of something that already exists in our culture. And I think Behrouz has such an important job of outlining that. It's not simply to say that this prison is extraordinary. It's a manifestation of a certain kind of neo-colonial logic. And I think, and I wondered if we were going to perhaps push the discussion a little bit towards that. I wonder if I could get you to read maybe a section of the text. And this is from the translator's reflection. This is the opening to the translator's reflection, which is at the end of the book.
These opening passages to the translator's reflection, I wrote in a way trying to express, trying to explain something particular about knowledge or insight, and how understanding this system requires a particular positionality, or being in having a particular viewpoint or perspective. And I wrote this as a story, and it's inspired by some of the research that I do in social epistemology. So I'll just leave it there and I'll read it. We can talk about it later. But I just wanted to put it into that framework. There is an island isolated in a silent ocean where people are held prisoner. The people cannot experience the world beyond the island. They cannot see the immediate society outside the prison, and they certainly do not learn about what takes place in other parts of the world. They only see each other and hear the stories they tell one another. This is their reality. They are frustrated by their isolation and incarceration, but they have also been taught to accept their predicament. News somehow enters the prison about another island where the mind is free to know and create, The prisoners are given a sense of what life is like on the other island, but they do not have the capacity or experience to fully understand. The people on the other island have special insight. They see things that the prisoners cannot. They create things that the prisoners cannot. And they certainly know things that the prisoners cannot. Some of the prisoners resent the people on the other island. Some simply do not understand the people there or try to undermine them. Some are indifferent to the other society. Some prisoners feel pity for them because they are confident that their own situation is changing for the better and they will eventually be provided greater freedoms. The two islands are polar opposites. One island kills vision, creativity, and knowledge. It imprisons thought. The other island fosters vision, creativity, and knowledge. It is a land where the mind is free. The first island is a settler colonial state called Australia, and the prisoners are the settlers. The second island contains Manus Prison, and knowledge resides there with the incarcerated refugees.
I think that's such a powerful story, and I think that comes through in the book about how the kind of creativity of the prisoners on the islands compared to the kind of mundane unthinkingness of the kind of, particularly of the Australian guards. And it's important to point out here that Behrouz in the book often refers to the Australian and New Zealand guards, and quite a few of the guards in the Manus Prison are New Zealanders. And so New Zealand, they are directly implicated in this kind of border regime. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit more. I know both you and Behrouz want to talk a little bit about ideas of kind of border technology and the kind of wider idea.
Yeah.
So do you want to say that, and then maybe Behrouz?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll leave it to Behrouz to explain in a little bit more detail, but what's really important about that particular thought experiment and about the philosophy behind the book is that there's something that the prisoners on Manus Island and Nauru know about Australia that settlers in Australia don't know. And I say settlers specifically because the same kind of technology, the same sort of systems of oppression and domination that have been inflicted on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from the time of invasion have been transformed and delivered in different ways on the border in terms of Australian border politics. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people know very well what's happening to the people in Manus Island and Nauru. So what I'm basically saying is that the people who are locked up and are experiencing this kind of systematic torture from the Australian government, they can see things about Australia that Australian settlers can't. I'll let Behrouz continue about that. Behrouz, I think we'd be really interested to know your interpretation of the special kind of understanding or the special kind of knowledge you have because you are there, you are in that system, and because you're confronted with the politics and the policies of the Australian government in Manus Prison.
Yeah, first I would like to mention that when I talk about fascism and fascistic culture, unfortunately, many people in Australia, actually, most of people think that I am only angry, and that's why I use this word. But fascism culture actually made Australia blind. They cannot see some reality. They cannot see some reality. So, there is a deep connection between what is happening on Manus Island and Nauru and with the Australian political culture. There is a deep connection. Even what's happening in Christchurch in New Zealand, definitely that was result of what the Australian government has done in Manus Island and Nauru. First, they created Manus Island and Nauru to strengthen systems. First, they started a big propaganda against the migrants. and they have used the migrants and migration and the refugees for their political counts for years, political aims for years and years. And first they produced violence and exported that violence to Manus Island and Norway. And after 6 years, we could see that they produced violence in, their neighbor, New Zealand. So definitely there is a deep connection. But when I say that, unfortunately, many people in Australia, I was in Port Moresby. They transferred me to Port Moresby before the election. So I was there, and for the first time, I had access to the Australian TV. So I was there when the Christchurch accident happened, the terrorist attack. It was very strange and really made me angry because I want to read the TV. Many people, many political experts, many journalists, many people were talking every day, 24 hours, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. They were talking about Christchurch terrorist attack, and they never mentioned Manus Island and Nauru. Now, it is so stupid that people were talking, they were blaming the Australian government and the politicians like the Prime Minister and the liberal politicians, and they said these people, they created hate among our community. They divided our community, and that reached to ended up with this Christchurch terrorist attack. But they didn't mention Manus Island and Nauru at all. It is strange for me. Still is strange that still people of Australia and the media and the universities, they think that Manus Island and Nauru are not a part of Australia. We are a part of Australia. We are a part of Australia, and we will be a part of Australia. Even they send us to other countries. We will be, and we have educated Australia for years and years. I have written about this already. The main article that I wrote was a letter from Manus Island. And I mentioned that we have educated Australian public. We have, the refugees, the people that were supposed, they put us alongside the terrorists, alongside the criminals, alongside the rapists, people, they accuse us with this kind of things. But in fact, we have educated Australia for years and years because our resistance have been a peaceful resistance, have been a completely peaceful resistance. But unfortunately, still they don't know. But I am sure on future, امید اینو میشه ترجمه کنی براش. میخوام اینو بگم من اگه یه استرالیایی بودم و یه نفر که تبعیدش کردن به یه جزیره تو یک زندان و 6 سال ما این آدم حساب نکردیم و یک کتاب مینوشت و بزرگترین جاهل ادبی کشور ما رو میبرد، تو همون پل سیدنی خودم رو آویزان میکردم به علامت اعتراض. تو پل بزرگی از کنار سیدنی این کار رو میکردم. ولی این یه جوری عادی شده تو استرالیا. یعنی مانوس و نارو عادیه، یه اتفاق عادیه. They have normalized this bad policy. They have normalized this for the public.
If I were an Australian citizen and I witnessed the government exiling someone to another place for 6 years and treated them in the way that we've been treated, and that person wrote a book And that book won the most prestigious award in Australia. If I witnessed that, I would go to the Sydney Harbour Bridge and hang myself. But the Australian people treat this as normal. What's happening on Manus Island and Nauru has been normalised. I think I might just add to that.
میخوام اینو بگم ببین این دیگه خیلی سوراله ما یه نفر رو بردیم توی جزیره ای یه سری آدم قرار بوده اینا رو انقدر شکنجه کنیم که فرار کنن برگردن به کشوراشون ولی بعد سینمای ما فیلمشون میاد روی پرده تئاترشون میاد تو فستیوال ما تئاتر درست کردن فیلم سینمایی کتابشون بزرگترین جایزه ادبی کشور ما رو میبره تو موزه ها و گالری ها کارهای هنری دارن نمایش میدن یعنی به همون ویدیو اینستالیشنه این همه مقاله نوشته شده چطور این یه اتفاق عجیبی این بزرگترین چالشه ولی این کشور چون در حال حاضر نمیفهمن این چیزا رو
This is one of the most surreal things you could imagine. The country has exiled a whole group of people to another island. It tortures them so badly in order to force them to go back to their own countries, the countries from which they fled. But after some time, in response to all of this torture, you notice that someone has made a film, and that film has gone to international film festivals. That someone who's endured that torture has contributed to theatre projects. So they've written a book that's won the most prestigious literary prize in Australia. They've written a whole range of different articles on different topics, and all of these together are an enormous challenge to the system, an enormous challenge. But the Australian people still haven't been able to see the paradox there, the surrealist element of that.
I think you wanted to maybe expand a little bit more on what Behrouz.
I think the only thing that I want to add to that, Behrouz explained it extremely well, but the only thing is that Australia, by treating refugees on Manus Island and Nauru in this way, they're transforming the identity and the emotions of the Australian public. They're reducing people's capacity to be compassionate, to treat each other with humanity. So it's not a coincidence that suddenly we're seeing a huge rise in abuse in different institutions in Australia. The elderly, for instance, there's a lot being exposed about how the elderly are treated, particularly in nursing homes, disabled people, the university, the way people are being treated, educators in the country are being treated as they're being degraded basically and these are some of the most important people in our society. On top of that, there are lots of people in Australia who came to Australia with visas, had a different migration experience, but suddenly where stories are coming out, reports are being written about families who have a disabled child, for instance. Suddenly they're being deported because it'll cost the Australian government too much money for that particular family to remain in the country. So there is very little outrage about this. And I think what's happening on Manus and Nauru is creating the conditions for people to ignore that. Or as Behrouz pointed out very well, they've normalized this kind of hate and enmity and lack of compassion between everyone. Eventually, people will be doing this to their own family members. They'll be doing this to their best friends. They'll be doing this to the most important people in their society. They're already, like we said, they're doing it to the educators.
That's so powerful words. It's just. Oh, would you like to say something, Behrouz?
I wanted to mention something about the systematic censorship. So they established this policy on base of national security.
So, and national interest. So that's why they justify the public and the media that they should ignore us. You know, the Australian newspaper, Sky News, Daily Telegraph, Financial Review, Channel 9, Channel 10, Channel 7, they completely ignore us in a way that we are not exist. And most of Australian people are watching these TVs, these channels, they have treated us in a way that we are not exist. They have done, and just SBS and ABC, they have bus sites, the only Guardian and the Saturday paper, I have only used these two papers to tell this story to the Australian public. Most of the media in Australia still they ignore us. For example, just last week, UNHCR published a statement. They published a statement. So about this policy, and they attacked the government. So what's happened? CNN International made interview with me and some of the refugees, and they published a story about it. About the self-harm and suicide attempts. Most of the international media, CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC, Reuters, France 24, everyone published almost Australian media were silent. Were silent. So even, so sometimes, the international media publish some, like New York, publish a story about here, but the Australian media, most of them are silent. And if you look at my Twitter, you can see that many times I attack them and I say that it is systematic censorship. Just look at this channel, this paper, international paper that publishes stories, but you are silent. This systematic censorship that always I mentioned. So, of course, we have been working and resisting under this, systematic censorship for years, for 6 years. And that's, I have an Italian friend. She visited Australia before doing report. After 2 weeks, she told me that why this country is like this. She compared Australian channel with their TV. So why these people, this country is like this? They don't have a serious debate on their channel. Just they are talking about koala, they are talking about the kangaroo that is went on top of the tree, and they are, helping that koala. They are they are talking about, So she was wondering, and I said, it is Australia. So Australia is a country of that controlled by the media, and the media always ignore us or manipulate Australian people or manage the information. So it is the Australian. We have been here for 6 years.
Thank you so much, Behrouz. We're going to go into our second poetry segment, and then we'll come back and we'll invite some questions from the audience, and then we'll go. So our second poetry readers will be Lindy Edmeades and Fiona Farrell. Oh, there she is. So I couldn't see her. So Lily Edmeades is a Dunedin poet and scholar. In 2018, she was the Ursula Bethel Writer in Residence at the University of Canterbury, an artist in residence at Massey University. Her second book of poetry, Listening In, will be published by Otago University Press in September this year. Fiona Farrell is a poet, novelist, short story, and non-fiction writer. In recent years, Fiona has moved to Dunedin from Christchurch, where she lived on the Banks Peninsula. She has written extensively about the Christchurch earthquakes. In 2012, she was appointed an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to literature. We give a round of applause to Linda.
Before I start, I just wanted to take a moment to actually acknowledge these great guests that have come to speak to us and enrich our culture, but also to thank Neil for organising this. I know Neil quite well. I love both Neil, so I've seen just the effort that it takes to organise something single-handedly. So if we could just give Neil. It's a great honour to be asked, obviously the nepotism here, but a great honour to be asked to respond to this event. I've written a poem in response to the book, actually, No Friend But the Mountains. It's a pretty risky thing to do because it is a remarkable book. I don't need to tell you to go and buy it because I think you will be convinced. And it's very easy for me to write from my very comfortable dining room table when this man is suffering this every day. But it's a gesture, and that's all we can do at this point. It's called We Are Fulfilling a Duty Assigned to Us, which is a term that keeps coming up in the book. To wake up, to open your eyes, to hear voices, to close your eyes, to open them, to hear a man beside you groaning as he moves from sleep to morning, to hear him say something, to catch a whiff of his stale breath, to hear another man beside him clear his throat, to close your eyes, to open them, to adjust your eyes to the light, to see the shadows on the ceiling, to watch the shadows as more men rise and groan and curse and wake and spit, to sit up, to feel hungry, to imagine something other than this, to hear yourself imagining, to stop yourself, to register the heat, to feel the stickiness of your naked back on the rotting mattress, to close your eyes, to open them, to stand up, to pull your t-shirt over your head, to feel dizzy, to sit down on the edge of the bed, to rub your eyes, to groan, to wonder why, to stop yourself from wondering why, to walk outside, to look around, to squint at the brightness, to look for a place to piss, to smell the sour stench of the open drain, to try and piss quickly while not breathing through your nose, to notice the tropical flowers growing along the edge of the drain, to wonder how something so beautiful could survive here, to see the line of men forming, to walk towards them, to join the queue, to hear a man say something, to say something back, to smell his stale breath, to stand, to move an inch, to stand, to fold your arms, to unfold them, to feel the heat coming up from the concrete, to look towards the shadows, to move an inch, to stand, to hear a dog barking in the distance, to enter the dining room, to see a man eating, to see him push food into his stale-smelling mouth, to stand, to feel hungry, to try not to feel hungry, to wonder what is for breakfast, to try not to wonder, just in case, to move an inch, to get to the guard sitting on the plastic chair, to hear him ask for your number, to tell him your number, to see him look for it in his book, to see him cross your number out, to hear him say, move on, to move another inch, to get to the front of the queue, to lean on the counter, to wait for your plate, to see the guard shake his head, to hear the words, unfortunately, breakfast has run out, to lean on the counter, to ask why, to be told we are fulfilling a duty assigned to us, to hear those words again inside your head, to stand, to register the heat, to turn, to see a man push his last mouthful into his stale-smelling mouth, to be told to move on, to get pushed aside, to hear some men yelling, to walk outside, to hear more yelling, to sit on the ground, to be told to stand up, to ask why, to be told we are fulfilling a duty assigned to us, to stand up, to walk towards the shade, to sit, to look at the fence, to close your eyes, to open them, to hear a dog in the distance, to close your eyes, to open them, to look at the fence. Thank you.
It's overwhelming to be here. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote rather a long time ago, also in response to an article that I read in The Guardian in 1999. It's interesting how much we depend on that particular newspaper as our media degenerates into triviality. At the time that I read this article, I was also reading about, it was an article about the birth defects that were consequent on the first Iraq invasion of 1991, and it was a report about the effect of depleted uranium. I was also reading about the translation of Hittite at this stage. It was something that just preoccupied me at the time. And one of the clues to the translation of Hittite was that there was a series of little cuneiform marks which were given the sound wa-a-ta. And the man who was trying to decode this vanished language, a man called Grozny, an Hungarian, a brilliant man, made the sudden leap to thinking that perhaps this word was the same as the English word water. And for some reason, he was proved right. It was in fact one of the clues. And when he understood this word, and when it was actually understood to be water, the whole language began to decode, and we were able to read these, this language that had disappeared. And what struck me when I was reading this article was how appalling it was that children in the same part of the world that this culture that I'm part of took shape were being deprived of their capacity for language. I'm going to start by reading a little extract from this article in The Guardian, and I'll read the poem, which is number 5 in a series called Words, War and Water. was written in 1999 by a woman called Maggie O'Kane, a journalist at The Guardian. For the past 3 months, Dr. Zinad has been monitoring the birth defects in their delivery room, where 20 to 30 babies are born daily. August, we had 3 babies born with no head. 4 had abnormally large heads. In September, we had 6 with no heads, none with large heads, and 2 with short limbs. In October, 1 with no head, 4 with big heads, and 4 with deformed limbs or other types of deformation. The most likely origin of this gene-twisting force is not Iraqi, but Western. During the 100-hour ground war of February 1991, coalition planes fired at least 1 million rounds of ammunition coated in radioactive material known as depleted uranium, the heaviest metal in the world, so tough that bullets coated in DU can slice through tanks like a knife through butter. And accompanying this article, there was a photograph of a beautiful young woman sitting in one of the waiting rooms, and on her knee, in that archetypal Mediterranean pose, the mother with her son was a little boy with a huge, distended head. His name was Omid Amiri, and this poem is called Omid Amiri's Skull Won't Stop Growing. This is the language of war. Can you hear it? Not trumpets or drums, nor the thrumming of machines, nor the thud of the big guns. Not the soldier crooning to his sweetie as he polishes his boots. This is the sound a child makes who is born with no head. This is the sound a woman makes who labours to bear a child without mouth, without ears, without fingers, a child whose head swells like a pumpkin. Can you hear it? This is the sound of bone cells in frenzy. This is the sound of an eyeball rolling like bruised fruit in the socket. This is the sound the child hears who has no ears. This is the sound of war. This is the blaring of trumpets and the clapping of satisfied shareholders. This is the whistling of the scientist in his laboratory. This is the babble of many tongues as they are simultaneously translated in the glass towers in the stone city. This is the burping of fat men and the scratching of their pens, signatory to all conventions. Can you hear it? The soft rush of water as the babies slip onto the table, crying though they have no mouths, listening though they have no ears, their tendril fingers twisted in threads of meaning. Thank you.
Say thank you so much to all our poets. I know we've kept you quite long tonight, so I might just ask Omid and Behrouz if they have anything to say, either in response to the poetry, and then I might invite a couple of quick questions. But I know I don't want to keep you too long. This is something
Just very briefly, well, first of all, thank you so much to all the poets. And as I said, so many ideas, thoughts, critiques have come to mind as a result of listening. But I think one of the main things is that when thinking about the reason why people move, and people have been moving since the very beginning, this is nothing new. The reason why someone decides to leave a society where they have family, they're familiar with the culture, they have a connection with the land, they know the stories, they know the societies. The reason why someone would want to give up all of that is in, I'd say in all cases, it's a result of something forced, something imposed. And I think especially the last poem shows that Western societies, imperialist governments are complicit in the reasons why people are forced to move from one place to another, to leave everything behind. And going back to the very first poem, the reason why people are living in situations where they have to struggle, they have to fight, and different sorts of situations occur or different kinds of groups arise. It happens as a result of something prior to that. It happens. The roots of that are in the geopolitical situation, and once we start to understand the way this kind of neo-colonial situation or the neo-colonial world is working, then we start to understand why we have mental institutions, places where we imprison or exclude or exile people to. When we're thinking about Manus Island, we're also thinking about our own societies. This is the sort of thing that actually translates, transforms, represents itself in our own environment, in our own culture. So I think I'll allow Behrouz to explain further, but what we're seeing here is something a lot more complex and interconnected. What's happened? The reasons why people move are also we need to start reflecting on ourselves and why, or what reasons are there for people to move, and our own complicity in that situation as well.
Thank you. I just wonder, I might leave the closing statement to Behrouz. Has anyone got a really burning question that they would really like to ask? We've got, okay, there's a few. I know you're front row, maybe, so I'll ask. Yeah.
Hi. First, I will say 2 words in Kurdish. Slav Kakbaros, Hoş Halım, Ka'edbinim, Hiwadarim Tebgilim. I want to say, so everyone understand, what you're describing is reminding me of Ba'ath regime in Kurdistan. It reminds me of Ba'ath regime in Kurdistan of Iraq. I'm concerned about safety, your safety. How do you feel about your safety in that situation? Because it's similar. I describe it as the dictatorship of Middle East in a modern way in this area. So how do you describe it, your safety? Aren't you concerned about your safety after this book and these publishing? Thank you. And thank you for everyone arranging this event. Appreciate it.
Behrouz, سوال شنیدی؟
من حقیقتش درست نمیتونم.
سوال این بود، سوال از یکی دوستان کردیمون هست که به شما سلام میرسونه، میگه که این شرایطی که الان توش هستی، توش گیر کردی، خیلی شباهت داره با شرایط عراق زمان رژیم باس، رژیم صدام. با اون موقع همه نگران امنیت بودن، نگران وضعیتشون بودن، شرایطشون خیلی خطرناک بود. شما الان بعد از این کتاب منتشر شد با فیلم و همه فعالیت‌هایی که انجام دادی نگران امنیت نیستی؟ خشونتی که ممکنه انجام بدن؟
دوستمون کرده یا
بله.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, unfortunately, I couldn't hear well, so I couldn't hear the poetry too. So
we will collect them and send them.
You know, I think it is interesting that everywhere that I go, you know, in America or in European countries, everywhere that we have an event, everywhere there are some Kurdish people there. And I think that is interesting. And I use that to say that it is, you know, this placement is a part of Kurdish history. And, you know, that's why everywhere that we go, we definitely there are some Kurdish people there. So about the safety, you know, I think it is a good point that, you know, I left the religious dictatorship system, and now I am living under another dictatorship system. So when I say dictatorship system, people of Australia say that Australia is not a dictatorship system. You know, they compare themselves with us in Manus. What is happening here, it is more than dictatorship system. So for someone like me, I am between the religious dictatorship system and modern fascist dictatorship system. So right now I'm living in the middle of this, you know. So that's why I asked this question that where should I go? You know, where should I go? So about the safety, you know, it is one of my big concerns. Safety is not mean that someone decide to kill you, you know. Safety is that when you get a small infection and you die, you know, safety is that in Manus Island. Safety is that you become sick and there is no medical facilities here to protect you. You cannot get proper medical treatment in Manus. So safety is that. So far, many people in Manus Island and now, you know, 12 people died because of this system, and most of them were because of medical neglect. So safety is that. So is safety when you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe with everything, you know. So safety is that you should, you know, protect yourself and keep yourself strong. You know, there are many people here who are still alive, but their mind, you know, they damaged mentally and physically. So, but for someone like me, you know, for a long time, I didn't feel safe in these circumstances. That's why for 2 years, I was working under him because I didn't feel safe with the authorities. So after more than 2 years, I started to publish my works under my real name. When I became sure that I have a network, I made a network around myself, and many people and media are aware of a writer who is, you know, living in Manus Island. So that's why, you know, but now I think it is hard for the Australian government to do, and because they should pay the cost, you know. So that's why now I feel more safer than before, because now I think it will be hard for them to do something, but always it is one of my big concerns in this island.
Thank you. I think we have room for one more question. I know a few hands are up. There's one here. Sorry we don't have more time. We're keeping us.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We've spent a couple of hours looking at you. Would you like to look at us? Have you seen us at all?
I will turn it around.
I didn't imagine I thought that there are 150.
Oh, there's more than that. Would you like to ask? Oh, that was the question. Oh, fantastic. So would anyone like to ask the final question of Behrouz? Or would you like just a quick question?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to say, Behrouz, for the last period of time I've been sitting here, this is amazing technology to be able to be in the same place with you at the same time when you can't move. And I just wanted to say, like I think everyone else here, I've felt your pain for the last period of time intensely. And I just wanted you to know that I'm with you and feel what you've felt just for a very short period of time. And I can't imagine being detained for such a long period of time. There's one comment I wanted to make. You used the word that detention centre is not an appropriate word, and I don't think prison is either. I actually think concentration camp is probably more applicable.
Yeah.
Because you're being held for no particular crime other than where you came from and what you fled. And I just wanted to share with you my shame, and thank you for being so open. Thank you.
Do you have any comment on that, Behrouz? Oh.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much for your kindness and solidarity. Actually, I think he's right and I agree with him. For a long time, I have been thinking about this, that even the prison word is not the right word that we use for this place, because in any prison in the world, they send people, they imprison people after an order by the Pope. So we committed no crime, and they didn't send us here and didn't imprison us here following a court order. So that's why. And also in any prisoners in the world, the prisoners have this right to have visitors. We don't have the right to have visitors. So that's why I think, in the prison, in other prisons in the world, the prisoners know how many they should be in prison, but we don't know. And exactly, it is the main torture, that we committed no crime, and we don't know how many years stay here, how many years they are going to keep us here. So that's why I think prison is not a strong word, but just few times I used Guantanamo, Australian Guantanamo, but later I found out that it's better I don't use this word, because remind terrorists. I don't say that all of the people. That have taken on the terrorists. I don't. The people the terrorist people. So that's why I didn't use this word. So I think, still I am thinking to find the right word to describe this place. And prison system.
Thank you, Behrouz. I think we're going to have to leave it there. It's been a long evening. I think just to follow up on that very quickly, and something that Omid and I have discussed, let's keep it coming. It's quite amazing how much of the similar kind of language that has come up. Even the idea, what the Australian government call it, a Pacific solution. The use of that word is quite a remarkable kind of echo of the past. But that takes us to the end of tonight, and I just would like, for one last time, to say thank you to Behrouz from the bottom of my heart, and to Omid for being here. It's a really special event for our city, and this is an extremely important thinker, an extremely important book that I encourage you all to read. And these are conversations that we must have. We must have. And New Zealand is not immune from this, as we have tragically seen in the last 6 months. So, could you please put your hands together to thank Behrouz? There is some food and tea available outside. I would like to remind you that we will be doing a screening of Chocka. Please tell us the time tomorrow evening. So if you've enjoyed tonight, please come and see Behrouz's movie. That will be at 5 o'clock tomorrow in Burns 2 Lecture Theatre. The posters are on the wall. Please take note. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
And thank you to Neil as well. Thank you.
Oh, it's signed off. Yeah.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Neil?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Sorry to keep you out so late. I hope Raph is okay. Yeah. Cheers. Thank you for sorry for keeping you so late.
No, thank you.
Yeah. I hope Raph is. I know we could talk all night.